guys, Seth here. Today we're gonna tie up a few of these. They're kind of a parachute ant that I've been tweaking with over the last couple of years. This is kind of where it's at right now. So yeah, let's tie a couple up. Tonight I'll be drinking a little bit of Dry Fly Distilleries bourbon. So yeah, crack one open. Let's get in tying. So like I said, this is gonna be like a parachute ant type of pattern. I like using a red thread. Creates a little bit of a hot spot between the gaster and the abdomen. Cover that back half real quick. What I do for the body is I take some dyed, this is kind of like a gray dyed deer hair. Like a gray dyed deer hair. Cut it off, take the fluff out, and I'll tie it in by the butts. The kind of object here is try to add as much buoyancy as possible. And so the tips aren't very buoyant. And the closer you get to the tip, it seems like there's less and less buoyancy. And so I like to tie in by the butts, that way right, all I'm using is the most buoyant stuff and I'm not using those tips. So I'll tie that in. Trim out these butts. It's not overly critical that you get them all because you're gonna cover them with thread anyway. Now what the rest of this gaster is gonna consist of is some brown, dark brown dry fly dubbing. What I find is that I typically use this more in the high mountains, alpine type areas. And what I've found is that those flying ants that you find in those areas, a lot of them where I go tend to be almost a dark brown or like a really dark amber color even. So I like to use this dark brown rather than a black. Probably gonna need some more, but we'll see how far that gets me. Alrighty, so I'll go right in front of that ball of dubbing now. I'll gather up all of this deer hair and I'll fold it over, kind of like a case. I like to do 2 turns like that, soft, and then I'll tighten it up, pulling straight down. Now, I'll get a few wraps securing that stuff. Deer hair is pretty fragile, and so you'll get 2 trout teeth that will cut that deer hair, and then you'll end up with a messed up body. And so what I like to do to kind of reinforce is I'll lightly go over that back, do a few wraps and then come back over again, and then a few wraps. Gives you an X of tying thread over that gaster, that back, that if any of those deer hairs get chewed on by a trout tooth and break, it won't completely come apart. Not sure what we got going on there. Alrighty, so now I'll just cover up these butt ends. Don't want to make too much bulk there. Another thing I'll do is I'll take this ultra thin bone dry UV resin, and I'll put a little coat of that over that as well. I don't find that it has a detrimental effect on the buoyancy, but it does increase the strength quite a bit. Alrighty, so now we're moving forward, and we'll be creating our parachute post now. For the parachute post, we'll be using white EP fibers. There's lots of different companies that make essentially the same thing with this yarn material, waterproof yarn. I find that these EP fibers are the most buoyant though. They seem to shed water the best. So I'll get about there. Tie in. Pull those butts up. Snip them off as best I can. These scissors are starting to get a little bit dull, making life a little bit difficult. Oh, and just like that, I pulled it out. Cover up those butts a little bit. I like to use this red thread because I like the area between the gaster. I think I already mentioned this, but the gaster and the thorax to be that band of red, kind of a little trigger point. So that'll go in front of those fibers, twist them up. Come back down, because I twisted them up, they'll wrap up on themselves like that. Create a real nice stiff parachute post. Alrighty. Now again, cover up those butts before I come back up to that post and just start wrapping up that post, giving us a thread base. Alrighty. So next I'll grab my grizzly hackle here. strip off the fluffy bits. I'll tie it in with a few turns against the shank before I lift it upwards and start tying it to the actual parachute post. There. Alrighty, now I've tied these with and without this wing. This part complicates the pattern quite a bit, but I like the way it looks, so I like to add it in. So now I take those same EP fibers. These ones are in a tan caddis color, because like I said, a lot of these ants that I see up there have almost like a tan, amber sort of color to them. So I'll tie that into one side on both sides of that post. I'll put my thread back like that, and then I'll wrap those along the front of that post and tie them down on that other side of the post as well. Now, once they're good and tied in, I'll leave them long just so that they're easier to keep out of the way. Kind of twist them up so that they're held together. Now I'll take some more of that brown dubbing and put that on. Oh. Alrighty. Now that we've got that, I like to do my first wraps behind those two wings. Kind of help prop those up and away from the body, because I don't like them just sitting straight on the body. Now that they're propped away, I'll start making wraps, kind of creating that thorax area. Ending with my thread back on that post. Alrighty, so now, the last thing to do is just wrap that hackle. And now we've got a lot of things kind of all going on, so you gotta make sure that we're not trapping those wings. We can get that wrapped down. Once we've done that, I hold that hackle downward and tie it off to that parachute post. Once I've got a few wraps, I'll turn her vertical. And give it a whip finish. I usually just do a one turn because I'm going to finish out with applying some more of that UV resin to strengthen everything up. So return it back to the vise, grab that hackle, snip it without also snipping your wing off. Now you trim the parachute, give yourself a little bit of something to see. I'll twist those wings up again, keep them together, and then I'll bring them back. I like them to be about the length of the body. Trim them off. Turn it. And set a little bit of UV resin to the base of that post. Cure it up. And there you go, you got a flying ant with a couple of wings on it. Alrighty. Tie up another one. So like I was saying, I really like this fly for my high mountain lake fishing. Here in Montana, we have a bunch of alpine lakes you can hike to in wilderness areas that are a great time. Sorry about that. Just wanted to make sure we were in focus still. So yeah, here in Montana, we have a bunch of mountain lakes that are great fishing. Hike up to them. A lot of them in wilderness areas. And these tend to be a very good fly, because what I found is that there's a few different kinds of food for those alpine fish. They got midges, they got all those mosquitoes that are in those alpine lakes. In addition to that, there's chironomids and midges. But then there's, in my opinion, there's a plethora of terrestrial life. You see lots and lots of beetles, both flying and not flying. And you see a bunch of these flying ants. And because you have all those different food sources, and none of them, I mean, you'll have mayfly hatches and stuff like that, and midge hatches that are somewhat reliable, but the amount of food up there is scarce during a large part of the year, and so a lot of those fish are real opportunistic. I found that this fly really works on those fish. I had several good trips for brook trout, several good trips for rainbows, and then I had one trip in particular where I couldn't keep the grayling off of this thing. I think I'll probably add some photos in here. To fill in this boring stuff when I'm just putting dubbing on. Probably gonna need more than that, but we'll see how far this gets me. But yeah, I don't typically use this on rivers. I have a few times. There's a few times where I was in some high mountain streams and I was working picky fish on blueing olive hatches, and basically how I was working was I'd put on one pattern. Usually I'd start with Sparkle Dun. I'd catch a few on that. The pod would smarten up and stop going after that, and so then I'd switch to more of a parachute type mayfly. Same thing, I'd get a few on that and then they'd smarten up, and then after that I would usually go to some kind of terrestrial. If it weren't this, it would be most of the time it was one of these, but it was either this or I was fishing a lot of hippie stompers this summer when I was in the mountains. So I'd switch to one of these, get a few fish, and then once they would stop eating these, I'd just start that cycle over, go back to the Sparkle Dun until they didn't like that anymore, and so on. Alrighty. Cover all that stuff up. Create my red band of thread. And then we'll start this parachute post. Alrighty. So you'll twist that up. Once it's nice and twisted, you bring it down. It'll double over on itself. Tie it down. So yeah, there are two trips in particular where this fly really shined. One of them was a hike to Alpine Lake that holds a potentially self-sustaining population of grayling. It's still kind of in an experimental phase, it seems, but there has been some success with them repopulating that's been documented by the state, and then I also saw some evidence of that on this trip that I did. And so basically I went out there, hiked, and got to this lake, and this was the first fly, just because it is my confidence mountain pattern. This is the first fly I fished, and I think I caught 8 or 9 fish within 30 minutes, at which point I decided to switch it up and see what else they might also like to eat. So yeah, there's that trip where this fly did very well. And then another trip that this fly did excellent on was another mountain lake, hiking up to it. A very high pressure mountain lake. Lots of people hike to this place. It's kind of it's an Instagram girl's dream. I don't like going to this place. It wasn't my decision just because there are so many crowds. I feel if I'm hiking that far, I want to be by myself, just with the people I hiked in with. But it was at the request of somebody else in the group, so we went. Anyways, we get there. High mountain lake with a man-made dam. I think it's about a 3-mile hike to this lake, but you get there and immediately when you get there, you get to a point on the trail where you're overlooking the lake and you can see the front of that dam, and you just see these big rainbows just cruising. And we're up higher than I typically see these flying ants. We're up quite a bit higher than where I typically see these ants. And the entire day, you just see them, like anytime you would look up, you would just see them flying between the treetops, just these amber wings just glowing in the sunlight. It was pretty crazy looking. But so we get up there and I'm like, well, I know what fly I'm using today. And I get going after it. And basically what was going on was there was enough wind that when the wind was blowing, it was pretty well, not impossible, but very difficult to cast. But every time that the wind stopped for, more than 5 or 10 seconds, way out in the middle of this lake, like it was long casts, probably at least 70-foot casts. Into the middle of this lake. But every time that the wind would stop, you would just see these pods of fish just start eating on top. And you would get a little window of, okay, that's where they're eating, and you'd be able to cast out. And after about 3 or 4 iterations of the wind stopping, the pods starting to eat on top, and me casting at them, I got one to eat, and it was a really good, like a really pretty, probably 16-inch rainbow. And I'll throw the picture in right here. And just keep in mind, I'm 6'10", so I make fish look small. You'll just have to take my word for it. That's a 16-inch fish, but yeah. Hooked that one, brought it in, and that kind of made my day. After that, the wind started howling and the lake fishing pretty much stopped. We did that lake, obviously, just like most lakes, has a creek that comes out of it that runs along the trail. And we did, on the way back, since our rods were already set up, we did stop and do some hole hopping on that creek and caught, several more fish, but nothing of any, size to really talk about. Just a bunch of, 6 to 10-inch fish, creek fish. but they are fun nevertheless. But yeah, that was another memorable outing with this fly this summer. Before we get too far, I just remembered that I didn't put any resin over the back. Like I said, those teeth can really tear that deer hair up. Alrighty, so we are ready for the hackle now. Oops. Alrighty. I think that'll be plenty. Hold it straight down. Capture it with a few wraps. Try not to get any more of those hackle fibers. This is size 12 dry fly hook. This is pretty much the only size I tie these in. These mountain flying ants seem to match this size quite a bit. They are, I'll say, it seems that the naturals tend to be a little bit skinnier in the gaster and the thorax than how I tie them, but I haven't seen that the fish have cared. I think a lot of the times they also take these as a beetle as well, since that's another thing that they have a lot of exposure to. So yeah, get those wings together, snip them off, and there we go. There's another parachute flying ant. Hope you guys liked it. If you have any suggestions on types of flies that you'd want me to tie up and BS with you guys about, then put those in the comments. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you guys liked it.